Omri Allouche, Head of Research at Gong, which you can find at gong.io. Welcome to the Data Exchange Podcast.
Hi, Ben. Thank you for having me. Pleasure being here.
Gong made our inaugural list. So, Omri, a friend of mine and I came up with this list of what we call pegacorns because we feel like there's too many unicorns. So we define pegacorns to be companies with annual revenue of at least 100 million. So Gong made the first list of AI pegacorns. So congratulations. So for our listeners, Omri, who are not familiar with Gong, can you give a very brief description of Gong?
Sure. Gong uses AI, machine learning, to help customers facing team have better conversations and base their decisions and work based on like reality and not opinions. So companies started in the sales domain mostly. So we're talking mostly like B2B sales, like SaaS products. And these are like multi-touch conversations. And before Gong, the only thing you could see is like, ask the salesperson opinion, how is it going? And they would say great, or maybe give you some pointers. But with Gong, you actually get real visibility into what's going on.
So in this example, Omri, what's the user interface? So what is the user seeing?
Right. So even if you take a call like this one that we have over Zoom, without Gong, you'd probably get like an hour-long call of, you don't really know what's going on. And with Gong, you'd be able to see who spoke when. So we'll have the different speakers. We'd have the complete transcript with searching ability, and we'd highlight and annotate that for specific interesting points. We'd extract the topics that people talked about, and then you can directly dive into the different things people talk about. And that's specific to the use case and domain. So for these podcasts, it can be around like...
So if you and I talk like 5 times, then I can go over and start running metrics against those 5 conversations.
Right. And even if we take all of your podcasts, it doesn't have to be with the same person. But you can see that you usually talk about MLOps, you talk about like maybe large language models or deep learning or all of those different things, and they would be highlighted as topics. And you can set your own things of interest, points of interest, and Gong will track them. From even the video track, we can show if you're using a webcam or sharing a presentation or doing a browser demo. If there's a presentation, we would divide it into slides, and then we can start providing like insights from that. What's better when you're trying to sell your product? Is it better to talk about competition or not mention competition?
So how does Gong define better? Is this like, are we talking about sentiment analysis at this point or what?
No, that's a very interesting point. I mean, we've actually looked into sentiment, and the only thing we saw is that in sales calls, people are actually nicer and sentiment is higher when the call is not really going well. If you want to buy a product, you're going to ask the hard questions, and you're going to get like the answers to the things that would maybe stop you from buying it. If you're all, that's cool, that's interesting, you're not really going to buy. But the nice thing is that we actually have a lot of data, and we know what's happening eventually. We know that there was a sale. We get this metadata from the CRM, like Salesforce, and we're able to tie that in. And that's a very interesting point as well. We have several ways to look into what's successful. I mean, think about like me asking you, how was your date last night? I mean, we can define a date as being successful if eventually you married the person, or we can say it was successful if you were willing to go on a second date. Okay, so we actually look at both things and try to balance what's the best.
So Gong is in the category of enterprise software. So that means if I'm a sales team, I have a regional manager. So then that means the regional manager can go to, does that mean the regional manager can log into Gong and see kind of a high level overview of how all these conversations are going?
Yeah, we actually serve several personas. So what you described is one very prominent use case, but there's also the use case of the actual salesperson. think of you just joining like a company as a salesperson and you don't know anything about like what's going on. With Gong, you can actually highlight something of interest, like you want to know how people handle pricing objections. The customer, the prospect is saying, this is too expensive, or we don't have the budget, and you want to know how top salespeople do that. So with Gong, you can actually create a playlist that you can listen to when you commute, and we would highlight those from recent calls all the time. You'd get more and more conversations where you can learn from, or we do some coaching and allow you to do this. A very interesting point right now is recession. It's hitting hard,
Right.
but you don't know the effect it has. And as a CRO of a company, you're probably interested in what does that mean, or a CFO. Does that mean that we have to, really lower our expectations, our predictions for or forecast for the next quarter, or not? So with Gong, you can get like trends and analyses of how those things play out. And you can see that people mention it more. And when they do, you tend to close less deals at a smaller amount and analyze all of those things based on your own data.
So as you were talking, I thought of a very good analogy, which is, imagine I'm a member of a sports team and you're the star player. I can watch a lot of your highlights to see how you attack the defense and this and that, right? So this is kind of similar to what you're saying, right? So if you're like an exceptional salesperson, I can go and figure out what does Omri do to get past this pricing objection and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes those are things that you won't really pay attention to and notice as a human. I mean, we can analyze for how long you're talking about pricing. I mean, obviously, you need to talk about pricing when you're trying to sell. But we see that some people are very brief about that, and that's not a good thing. And others talk for very long periods of time about that. And for each person, we're actually able to analyze what they can do to improve, which is really interesting because it changes between companies and domains. It's not just best practice. But based on real data, you can analyze that and get to good insights.
So you folks have had several years of having Gong deployed in many different enterprises, different teams, different industries, and so on and so forth. What has been the impact? So, for example, have you seen behavioral changes in terms of, you had a novice salesperson, and then over time they just become much more efficient?
Yeah, definitely. One thing we see is a much faster ramp-up time for an onboarding time for new hires. I mean, think about like this process. If you're trying to sell a product that requires like a pilot period and legal and security and all those things, sometimes sales cycles can be like 6 to 9 months. So you just joined, you have 3 to 4 months of like just onboarding, getting to know the product and all those things. Then you start selling. And if you're not really doing well, the one thing that would happen without Gong is that a year later, 20, 30, 40% of the people you hired would be laid off because they're not really performing well. But it takes you time to learn that. Using Gong, pretty early on, you can get them to onboard better, and you can look at the actual metrics and guide them into becoming better, and follow up and see where they're lagging, so you don't have to wait the full time. You're actually able to give them insights and learnings much faster, which is one of the things that we see. And we see deals cycles become shorter because you're more on top of things. One aspect of the product is that we actually do more and more things for you. We remind you that you need to follow up on an email. We actually, suggest an email for you. You sent me an email, I'm out of office until June 22nd. The date arrived, you get a notification, Omri just got back from vacation, continue the conversation. All of those things really help you, focus more on the things, as we like to do in machine learning, like let humans focus on the things that only humans can do, and let the machine take care of everything else. All
right, so you brought up machine learning. So now let's take a look into the black box that's Gong, right? So take us through like the end-to-end pipeline from the time, let's say, we record this meeting to all the things that Gong does with this meeting.
Yeah, great question. I'm sure I'm going to miss a lot of those things, but at the end of this call, we want to get this speech recognition, the transcription for the call, and for that we have to know the language of the call. So we first have a model that identifies the language based on short audio segments. Okay, and this is really really interesting. You learn both, you identify and classify both the language and the accent, and based on that we send it to different transcription engines that we built in-house as well for all of those use cases.
Now, increasingly, we live in a world where there may not be a singular answer because people mix and match, right? So people may intersperse Spanish words with English words, Hebrew words with English words, and so on and so forth, right?
Definitely. We see that a lot. And we actually, a lot of time actually weave together several languages because we see people change a lot of those things. It's really, yeah.
So the raw input here is an audio file, and then you have some kind of engine that decides what transcription model to use. And then I imagine you go into the transcript itself or the audio to understand what topics, what key segments are in the conversation, like where did the conversation turn from this topic to that. So these are all models, I suppose.
Yeah.
Right? So are these models language agnostic at that point once you have a transcript?
So mostly not. We actually, we start with a multilingual model, but when we have to get to the best results you can, we actually get label data whenever we can in the language of choice, and then we improve on that. So we highlight interesting parts of conversation and stuff based on the language itself.
So what are you guys highlighting at that point? Are you doing named entity recognition, like what companies got mentioned?
Yeah, we identify companies, we identify people, we identify numbers, which are usually interesting, like the amount of dollars, the seats, etc. We highlight you can define, or when we define certain phrases that are interesting, like talking about a pilot or making a decision, stuff like that. And we also have classifiers that are really around concepts. So we identify people mentioning their position, which is not, just keyword based. There are many ways to do that. Or talking about pricing objections. You can give that in many different ways, but we identify the general concept and highlight that.
And how does the model improve over time? What's the feedback mechanism? Do I, as a user, go into Gong and say, hey, you missed this particular thing? So how does the model improve?
So we're starting to experiment with actually getting feedback from users. But so far we're in charge of making this.
Because I don't know if you're familiar with Google Translate, right? So Google Translate, you do the thing, and then you can suggest.
Mm-hmm.
You can say, hey, this part you may translate in a certain way.
Yeah, we definitely like that. One thing that we actually saw when we were working on this is that the human labels that we get are not, very correct a lot of the time. So that's kind of because people don't always exactly understand the concept, or even just make a small mistake. So it was easier for us to actually have people that sit and properly label this. But given the size of Gong right now and the number of users we have, we're definitely starting to experiment with getting user feedback and hoping it would help our models improve significantly.
So what was the founding year of Gong?
2016.
2016. All right. So 2016 predated large language models, transformers, and all these things. So I imagine that since the start of Gong, the models have just improved tremendously, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the cool things over there is that we can dream much much crazier and cooler dreams right now, which was quite amazing. I mean, and we experiment with those things all the time. So like a year ago, even like 2 years ago, you couldn't imagine like a machine suggesting an email, writing the email for you, based on the actual content of conversation. But these are some of the things that we're working on in Gong, and it's quite insane what can be done right now. I think part of our role as data scientists is actually like building the bridge between what technology can do or might be able to do in a year and the actual business needs and like product requirements. A lot of the things that I do is kind of like suggest to product, hey, maybe we can try this, and they're saying it will never work, and I'm saying, yeah, we actually get a good result.
What's your process, Omri, for incubating ideas? So in other words, let's take, for example, Transformers, right? So when they first came out, hey, this is great, but is it really at the point where it's efficient or practical enough to deploy to production? So what's the process from taking an idea that looks great on paper and just saying, yes, we're ready, go live?
Yeah, so we need to understand that in Gong, we're working in large scale production environment. And so
mission critical.
Yeah, it's not about like, getting state-of-the-art results on some test set. It's mostly around like not embarrassing yourself and being able to serve all of those things with, correct time and moving fast. And so that's part of the things that we need to learn all the time to balance those things. We try to follow like 70, maybe 20-10 rule.
Yeah. Is there like a process for saying, okay, so we do this limited deployment, then we learn some more, and then we go back, then iterate? So what's your process for rolling something a big idea into production?
Yeah, so we actually, even though Gong serves like more than 3,000 companies, we actually always start with like design partners. So if we take a problem, okay, we come up with some ideas, and we, as soon as possible, try to get feedback from users. And sometimes that would even be, in the Wizard of Oz approach. Are you familiar with the term? It's kind of like, we tell them that we have a smart model that does ABC, and we actually sit down and do hand labeling just to get their feedback and see what value and how they use these model predictions and make sure that we're building something that they actually need. When we have this, we're actually focusing on a subset of the world. I call it like finding our oasis. We find a place where we're saying, this is where we can actually provide tangible value. And if you take what we've mentioned in the pipeline, it might be that transcription errors would get large language models to completely misbehave because they were not trained on, free conversations. And we see that. Just adding, from time to time in like things that you put to GPT-3 would get it to perform much worse. Okay, so we're saying, let's move this aside. Let's take perfect transcription. Let's define the problem. Let's see what we can do and solve it. And then we show like initial results, and we get some excitement from users. And then we come up with a plan to actually move it to production. Okay, what can we define that would be most useful? Maybe this technology is too costly for very long calls because it doesn't scale well with like the duration of the process, but we can do it for shorter ones. And maybe we can try to we don't have enough GPUs available in AWS even to do those things. But when we're starting and experimenting and learning to optimize those things, we can start releasing it to some subset of our users, and we get feedback. And so we gradually release those things through the LA limited availability up until we have a GA, and we release it to everyone. And during this process, we improve the performance of the model in terms of accuracy, precision recall, F1, but we also improve the engineering and MLOps perspective of how fast it runs, how much it costs, and all of those things. And we get the customer feedback on how we actually communicate or show the results of the model. So all of those things work in tandem. And it's not like we have a model, now it's ready, now we can use it. No, we always try to, move quickly and get things to production as quickly as possible, and then learn and improve.
So we talked a lot about audio and speech technologies. Oh man, there's a lot of great improvements there too since 2016, man.
Very interesting,
especially
very
on the
interesting
deep
period. It's
especially on the
amazing
deep-
what's done today.
Yeah, especially on the deep learning side. And also now people are even talking about end-to-end models, right? In speech. And then you mentioned earlier about video and looking at what people are displaying in case it's a video conference and things like this. So let's say I'm a brand new data scientist, machine learning engineer, and I want to work at Gong, right? It seems like a lot of things I need to learn about, which I have to admit, Omri, a regular data scientist does not work with audio, does not work with video, right? So most data scientists probably work maybe with text, maybe if they're really cutting edge, some images, but most of the time we're talking structured data, time series, and things like this. So how do you train a new data scientist, or do you actually just go out and seek specialists? Like basically you look for people who already are savvy with speech technologies and stuff like that.
Yeah, great question. So when we started, I actually had like the privilege of doing like all of those things and experimenting with the different domains. But as we grow and mature and the group gets larger, then we're actually more focused. We have an NLP team, speech technologies team, a predictive modeling team, and operations team even that is in charge of getting those models trained and into production.
Which, by the way, let me just interject quickly for our listeners. For many of you, you've heard me say this, but NLP for speech is so much more challenging than regular NLP.
Yeah, definitely.
Because we don't speak perfectly, for one thing. So you look at the transcript; it's just a lot of it is just garbage, right? So
that's very true, and that's very challenging. But that's like what we like. I think one of the things that is very interesting is that we don't just we can take things off the shelf and just use them, because they were not trained on our own domain. And even if you get something, there are a lot of like minutiae aspects that are important, and so you get all of the things that you learn and you need to apply them to your own use case, which is very interesting. And to answer your question, so we nowadays we actually focus on like people that have like some experience, usually did their master's or PhD thesis in a specific domain, have some experience with the relevant technologies, and are looking forward to learn and improve with time.
So for people, Omri, who don't work with speech, how easy are the tools to use compared to other data types, right? So I mean, in other data types, you have things that will help you clean the data, massage the data, and then I think for most areas in machine learning, when you get to the model, there's probably enough off-the-shelf models for you to play with, but it's that data pipeline that, by the way, I just found out in computer vision, the tools for working with images and video is just not that great. So I'm assuming for speech, it's also somewhat challenging to take raw audio and just turn that into something usable, right? So I guess you guys in your case, do you go basically, here's an audio file, but I don't care about that. I just care about the transcript.
No, that's a great question, because I also teach like data science and deep learning, and when I start, then I talk about like the general framework of mapping like inputs into outputs, and just this is the audio and this is the transcript, and in between there's a neural network with many parameters. Problem solved. Let's all go celebrate. And then this like the first class, and then you start breaking it into all the things that you have to do in order to actually
Well,
make
you
it
still
work.
have to do some signal processing, right?
So yeah, yes, to some levels, but
Yeah.
even before that, think about like, you get in a transcription, and I'm saying, let's meet on the 23rd. If and we're mapping the audio signal into written letters. If somebody wrote the digits 2, 3, RD, okay, then it's actually much harder for the neural network to make this mapping than if we actually wrote this as 20, the TWE, etc., 23rd.
Right.
Okay, and if you're explicit about that, because you heard the word third or 20 in many different cases, and the digits 2, 3, RD are very rare, obviously, right? So even something like this is important to the outcome of the model, and you need to see this. Let me give you an example. I've mentioned the LID, the language identification model that we have. So we actually had a model running to like pretty good results, and we have monitoring in production, running all the models and their predictions, and we actually saw that there was a very large proportion of some language in short audio calls. And it was weird for us. Why would short calls have much larger percentage of certain language and not, others? And we actually went and listened to these calls and saw that short calls are sometimes calls where you're trying to reach a number and you hear a message like, thank you for calling ABC. And there's background music. And the background music is actually, it was not in the train itself, but it's actually in the inference being recognized as, can you guess what language? What language is the most musical?
I don't know.
French.
Oh, really? Yes.
French was actually, it's a funny anecdote. But when we do this, you understand that it's not just about doing the mapping. So we actually developed another model to identify music. And once we identified music, we removed it from the selection criteria. It was, we didn't choose these segments for identifying the language, and our results, were significantly improved. So it's not just about doing the, put data in, get model predictions out. It's a lot about understanding how the model works, what's going on, doing error analysis, and all the classic machine learning mastery.
So what are you excited about these days? So if you look 6, 12 months down the road, so the things that you are paying attention now that are happening more on the research side, is it still the kind of the continued progress in large language models, making them more efficient, and so on and so forth, multimodal models? So what in particular are you most excited about?
So yeah, great questions. I think that like large language models are definitely on this front. It's not just about like making them smaller or more efficient to run in production, but more like making sure how you can actually use them for specific use cases. I mean, if you actually experiment with those things, then I wouldn't say that you often see like cherry-picked results, but once you pay attention to, can I actually release this as a product, you're starting to pay more attention to all of those.
When you get into what we found in our surveys is most NLP teams are happy that there's a lot of off-the-shelf models, but what they really want are models, are tools to tune those models for their very specific use case or domain, right? So you can imagine a large language model is great, but what if I start applying it to some narrow area in cancer research, right? So
right. So eventually, what you do and what we see is that you can start with a very large language model, which is a great like few-shot learner, and then but once you want to get to good results, then you can label, and you can get to much better results with a much more compact and efficient model. And I would even argue that a lot of our world is not around like devising the algorithm; it's more around like data. Right. Building the data set, like the data-centric movement is very, we do this for years. And for us, like
having the tools to help get good labeling tools so that the experts who know the domain and field can label, and then retrain, and then iterate if you have to label more data, right? So, but that cycle, we need better tools for that. And by the way, I think what most people don't understand is when you take the large language model, you label a few examples, then you try to see if the tuned model is better. This tuning does not require massive compute at that point. You can do this in a machine, right? So
Right.
even in your laptop, maybe just a CPU sometimes, right? So
Definitely. For us, even like choosing what examples, what do you send to labelers? How do
Right.
you work on that? There's the field of like active learning, but it's, in our experience, it's not enough. So we have a lot of like cool internal technology of like how to build data sets that would be very effective in order to get to high quality classifiers in different domains.
what's your sense of multimodal models? So in your case, you might have the audio and then some slides and some gestures, and so on and so forth. So what's your sense of how useful multimodals are today for someone like you who's out there?
It's a great question. I mean, it relates to your previous question about like how do we know when to actually adopt the technology and advancement. So up until now, there's very cool there are very cool works around like improving speech recognition ability using by reading the lips simultaneously to the audio and stuff like that, which we have in Gong. But in Gong, we chose not to focus on these things, because they require a lot of like compute power. So you actually have to analyze video and audio simultaneously. We don't always have that. I mean, we can have this conversation with our webcams turned off, or we can have a phone call, and then
Right.
I will not be able to provide this to the level. And actually, like our speech recognition capabilities are pretty good. So we actually chose to focus on like other fields. But one of the things that we have to do all the time is kind of like, be on the watch, listen to all of the cool things that are happening and see how they work out. And I definitely see progress in those aspects.
So what about
I can give you even like one example of how like using, or two examples of like using different domains for data that can really help. So if we're having this conversation, okay, a major one of the algorithms that we have is understanding who spoke when. And like we as humans are pretty good at that. I mean, a human would be pretty easily able to tell when you're talking or when I am. Machines are not that good. Okay. So one of the things that we do is actually get the signals from Zoom around who's talking at a certain point of time. But that's very, very coarse. That's very incorrect when you do that. But we're able to take these as initial guides and refine them and improve that. And it's a patent application. It's a patent that we have registered that gets to much better results on these use cases. And so I don't know if we should call it like multimodal, but we're actually getting those like video signals and the audio, and when you combine them, we get something that's much better than you would get.
It is, yeah. I would consider that multimodal. So earlier you mentioned this example of helping me compose email, right? So using large language models. So what about speech synthesis? Are you guys playing around with speech synthesis?
Sadly, no.
Yeah.
We would definitely want to do things like that. I think that it's definitely, if we look at the years ahead, this would be one of the things we would invest in. I think that in Gong, it's not just about the.
I may have an Israeli startup, but we can talk offline. That I'll point you to.
I know quite a few and love what they're doing.
Yeah.
In this field, and there's definitely a lot of like huge progress over there.
So we can close with this topic, which is a kind of important and kind of sensitive topic, but since you guys work a lot with the conversations, transcripts, and so on and so forth, responsible AI. So responsible AI is this umbrella term which collects helps people manage a bunch of risks pertaining to AI. So it could be security and privacy, fairness and bias, interpretability, safety, reliability. So do you guys have any specific groups or initiatives around responsible AI?
Yeah, definitely. This is something that I'm very happy that we get a lot from customers. I mean, when we're selling to large enterprises, they all care about those things, which is great because I think that we all have to make sure that our models are taking
especially in certain domains, Omri, like the healthcare or finance, right? So yeah.
Right. And so we pay a lot of attention to this from like multiple aspects. I mean, even from like a business perspective, just think about all of the like sales calls of like a Fortune 500 company being leaked somewhere, or we can have like a conversation and you can share like pretty private bits of information and they would be, like leaked outside. So we definitely look at those things. For example, we have a model that automatically detects you mentioning like a credit card number. And we have an automatic process that would take this call without allowing any human to even touch it and would remove all of the sensitive information from it from the audio itself. So it's just completely deleted. And then it goes through like the regular processing and is used by people. I think that one of the important aspects over there is to be conscious of those things and take them into consideration, to map yourself first, like to test yourself, am I biasing? Do I have some bias?
Or how do you, in that example you cited, so how do you know it works? So what is the margin of error? Like if at one point the model makes a mistake and gives out some sensitive information, so so how do you ensure against all of these, right? So
we have a zero tolerance policy for like something like credit card and stuff like that. So we'd actually get to like very high recall, even if we have to sacrifice precision significantly, but that still performs pretty well. And maybe just to add to those things, I think that it's important when you're working, we talked about like coaching and we talked about all of the other things, we'd never be in a position where we're saying this person is not, doing things right, or, they're underperforming or stuff like that. I think that you have to make sure that you're conveying the data information and you try to remove whatever bias you can from this. But eventually just give the data for a human to make the decision. And I don't even think that it's kind of like needs to be based on those things. Like Gong is a platform for improving and getting better. I think that we're far from a world where AI should make decisions for us. And once we understand it's our responsibility, both as data scientists and as users of AI platforms, to ask the questions, to understand how models are working, to look into the biases, then there's an encouragement to build better products and build better models and AI systems that would know how to cater for those things and avoid certain errors.
So in closing, so if someone wants to work for you in the research group at Gong, I'm assuming you're hiring, and what are you looking for?
Yeah, so we have several open positions, and we're growing rapidly, so things can change pretty quickly. We put a lot of emphasis on NLP. And as we mentioned, like large language models and getting those like actually in production at large scales for millions of hours and tens of millions of emails or hundreds of millions of emails every month. NLP is a very big field, both in like doing research and team leads, which we will go in the team. We have operations team, so I think we're starting to better see how we do MLOps and serving models and all those other aspects. And predictive modeling is a big thing for us. Think of all of the interactions that you have, the emails, the calls, text messages, Slack messages, trying to see from them what would actually happen, what's the next best action is also something that we put a lot of focus on. And that that includes data analysts, data scientists, and data engineers. So we're based in Israel, in Tel Aviv. And so far are focused on doing those things. But if people are interested in even working in an AI first company and doing like a development work or some other like great product aspects, feel free to reach out. And I'd be happy to recommend Gong and share the information.
And as I mentioned at the intro, Omri will be giving a keynote at the upcoming NLP Summit. You can check the episode notes. And thank you, Omri.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, everybody. It's been great.